Hello. Welcome, one and all, to Aquatic Concept Review. I hope you've all been having a good time with the festivities on this fine day. We here in the fishing department have invited a number of angling enthusiasts to submit concepts of their dream fish for review. It promises to be a diverse and exciting bunch, so you, dear audience, are in for a treat. Just in case we have any new researchers listening in, let us quickly go over some ground rules and guidelines. Number 1. These reviews will be focused on the fishability of each concept. We will also take time to note the forms and aesthetics of each, but we will not be reviewing the ecological roles of these concepts. Number 2. In order to get a good idea of what the concept is, I will create a not-to-scale simulacra of each concept while we discuss them, like so. Number 3. At this early stage, we are not interested in passing or rejecting concepts, merely offering some feedback, both positive and negative, to guide future development. Number 4. It is common for multiple related concepts to be submitted together, such as for mooching or intuition purposes. In such cases, they're reviewed as one submission. Number 5. More accurately, this is a review of aquatic life forms and related concepts. Someone, somewhere, once decided that aquatic means anything that swims or would otherwise be comfortable in liquid or liquid-like environments, and this department has never known peace since. This includes plants, animal, fungi, algae, essentially anything except for arcane entities and inanimate objects. This is life form review, after all. Now, in terms of quote-unquote fishability, I will be evaluating concepts on the following 4 categories. 1. Mechanical complexity. How much skill does optimal fishing for this particular concept demand? Number 2. Fairness. How fair do the proposed traits feel? Is it accessible? Remember, concepts which rely on skills that do not exist are not eligible for review. Number 3. Engagement. How deeply would an angler have to engage with the environment to catch this fish? How much do they have to understand the surrounding ecosystem? How much will this fish make one appreciate the area in which it is found? And finally, last but not least, number 4, aesthetics. How interesting does the fish look? Would people want to catch it? Personally, I would want to catch any fish, but not everyone is like that. As you can see, these categories are quite simple, but very important for cultivating an appreciation for aquatic life across the star. For ease of understanding, a chart will be produced for each concept as a visual display of the approximate score it received in each category. Note that higher is not necessarily better, it's just a way of representing the review. If you wish to dispute final scores, you may submit your argument through the correct channels and we will give it due consideration. We will not be taking any questions at this time. Let's see, I believe that's all, so without further ado, let's begin. First up on the list, we have, let's see, The Greatest Serpent of Ronca, submitted by Female Spy. Ah yes, for those unfamiliar with the review process, most researchers choose to submit concepts under aliases to eliminate bias on the reviewer's part. This concept is it's an enormous serpent approximately between 1,080–1,320 ilms in length, closely resembling the greater serpent of Ronca, a popular concept that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. Let's take a look. The proposed creature is approximately the length of a blue whale, a concept that I'm quite partial to myself. I would consider myself a fan of whales, though perhaps this one is considerably larger than a whale due to its pretty enormous girth. Instead of swimming through water, this fish swims through the stars. Aside from its size, this greatest serpent is differentiated from its inspiration by the presence of a pair of minuscule wings, which shouldn't be able to generate nearly enough force to move it through space, and yet somehow it does. My colleague at, never mind, it was something about a bee, I don't know. Anyway, cosmic horror has become strangely popular around here recently. Well, perhaps it's no wonder that those who specialize in the deep sea find themselves easily turning their expertise to the similarly cold, dark, vast, and inhospitable sea of stars. Still, this might be a bit more cosmic cuteness rather than cosmic horror, in my opinion. Such a large creature, provided it is not too reliant on atmospheric ether, seems well suited for the expanse of space, so it makes a good deal of sense to me. It certainly captures the imagination. Naturally, catching such a formidable beast is no easy feat. It only appears briefly but regularly and can only be lured out by the capture of its quote-unquote guards, as noted in the submission. A pair of highly elusive, luminescent jellyfish. Once the greatest serpent has been lured out, anglers may find it has a voracious appetite, biting swiftly and powerfully on suitable pieces of bait. Successful capture hinges on extremely specialized equipment with a marvelously high gathering rating. If you're new here, gathering rating is a way that we score gear, which seems appropriate for a creature of such magnitude. The researcher has also proposed that the greatest serpent would be attracted to sufficient displays of devotion to the greater serpent that inspired it, necessitating the procurement of one or more specimens to attract its attention. It's an interesting idea, but I'm not sure if it's quite possible within current constraints. It'd be a bit difficult to create a creature like that. In terms of mechanical complexity, the proposed concept is quite simple. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, higher score does not always mean better. Very simple concepts can be very interesting, but at first glance it does not appear to require very high amounts of technical skill. I would be interested to see further development on the so-called guards. If the greatest serpent itself may be quite straightforward, its guards have great potential to introduce something new and exciting to the experience. For fairness, I would say this concept is very fair. Regular appearances mean it is easily accessible by fishers across the star, and its generous parameters ensure that laborious preparation will almost certainly be rewarding. This is a philosophy that has performed excellently in many fish in the past. Regarding engagement, details on the exact environment that the fish is going to are sparse. This does leave room for some potentially interesting possibilities. Again, how does one catch the guards? Are they perhaps very subtly different in bite timings, such that only experienced anglers familiar with the ecosystem will be able to identify their tugs reliably? This is probably the area that needs the most development with this concept at the moment. That said, I have to give the designer points for the time frame they've chosen for these fish. Midnight is a very cinematic time of day, night, and functions well with the overall cosmic concept. Having no weather requirement means prospective anglers will have the chance to experience a multitude of different conditions and truly get to admire the unique and sometimes or oftentimes bizarre phenomena that manifest in our beloved sea of stars. Overall, this concept needs some more details, but certainly shows promise. Personally, I very much enjoy the look and basic idea of it, so I will eagerly await further developments. Next up, this concept seems to come from a designer with a very different design philosophy. Let's take a look at this walking shard submitted by Beans McGee. It is a minuscule freshwater crab that camouflages itself among natural deposits of water crystals, appearing at first glance to be nothing more than tiny shards of crystal. The largest individuals are no more than 2 ilms in length, with the smallest adults being as little as 1/3 of an ilm. How cute! The notes here say that these exceptionally timid crustaceans only emerge under the cover of darkness, thunder, and rain to feed on algae. Despite their small stature, they have a deceptively ferocious tug, as they have to have a strong grip to avoid being swept away by the churning waters. Furthermore, these little crabs will only emerge from hiding when no predators are around. Their predators are... here we are. Electric trout, a nocturnal, medium-sized fish that hunts using the residual lightning ether generated by thunderstorms. These two concepts are designed to always be active at the same time in an effort to discourage lengthy pre-preparation. Fish jail, I believe some have taken to calling it, the practice of arriving extremely early to any given fishing spot in order to prepare. It's certainly a controversial practice here in the department, as doing this means you are unable to leave the zone, which some would argue is rather unfun and defeats the point of fishing. Still, others think it's every individual fisher's choice. Myself, I prefer to stay neutral on the matter. Anyway, this one strikes me as quite straightforward. Any angler aspiring to capture a walking shard of their own will need a strong familiarity with every other fish in the pool to identify and catch enough trout to entice the crab into the open before both fish go back into hiding. In terms of fairness, having both fish reliant on rare weather conditions may be discouraging to some, and the small window to catch introduces a not insignificant risk of failure, which may in fact encourage quote-unquote jailing at the cost of half as many valid windows. I would maybe consider extending the active period of the electric trout, for example. Of course, the purpose of the concept is defeated if the window is too lenient, so this will have to be a delicate balancing act for the designer. I will say that I appreciate the time periods selected for these fish. Fishers will be encouraged to arrive before sunset and be treated to what I'd imagine is a very cinematic view of the sun dipping below the horizon as the sky fills with storm clouds. Aesthetically, it's a very cute concept. The bright, shiny shell is quite eye-catching as well, though I'm not sure if fishers would be too impressed with water shards. They're quite common in this line of work. Perhaps some other sort of crystal might feel more special. That said, it's certainly not necessary for a fish to be particularly flashy or special looking, so this is a matter of personal taste in the end. Overall, this walking shard is a promising concept. It will require very careful tuning to succeed, I think, but it could be rather excellent if the designer nails the balance. I'm sure testing it will be fun. Next on the list is... this is a pamphlet encouraging fishers to stay hydrated and stretch regularly. It must have gotten shuffled in with the stack. Well, it's a nice reminder, but it's not a concept, so we'll just set this aside. And here's the real next concept on the list. It's another small creature. I must say, megafauna are quite charismatic and capture the imagination like no other. Like I said, I'm a whale enjoyer, but I do appreciate our small animal creators. They're a bit less eye-catching at first glance, but captivating in their own way. Oh, but please forgive me if I start to ramble a little bit or get distracted. We're on the clock here. Let me introduce the concept properly. This is the Scion of the Seventh Scale by Coburn. It is a small variety of serpent that reaches a mere 3 to 7 ilms in length but weighs up to a staggering 1 pons, suggesting a remarkably dense internal structure. It's fairly uncommon for early concept drafts such as this to specify a weight, so I'm glad to see it being considered in this case. And the notes here say that this concept was designed for a very unique habitat, ether-drained wastelands, broadly regarded as natural disaster zones, not typically relaxing fishing spots, but, well, sufficiently loose sand has been ruled to be a liquid-like environment for the purposes of categorizing aquatic life forms. While they are somewhat more uncommon, sandfish are very much an established niche here in this department. This particular concept is bright white from nose to tail, blending in with its bleached environment, and comes with a specialized fin to reflect light to blind predators and hopeful fishers alike. This concept is accompanied by 2 supporting concepts, it looks like. The long spine perch, which functions somewhat as the staple fish of the ecosystem, you know, the more common or standard fish, I suppose. And the world spine worm, a shark-sized version of the scion that is truly just a large worm that simply emerges when mist blankets the area. Despite its resemblance to the fabled mist dragons that are known to patrol ether leech deserts, it is not a juvenile dragon. In context then, the scion is probably the smallest creature in this set of fish. Unlike its larger, common cousin, it appears only under certain, fairly uncommon circumstances, where the air is a particular degree of scorching and only early in the morning. As for other technicalities, it bites very rapidly but escapes just as swiftly. Despite the relatively low competition for the hook, this fish's blinding fin makes it deceptively difficult to reel in. We've seen similar concepts in the past, so it's definitely an idea that's been proven to work, although these concepts have not been without some small amount of controversy. I do take special note of the fact that this fish does have a more common and ordinary version, something which, as we all know, suggests a more forgiving design. In that context, I would say it's a very fair concept indeed. Though the time frame in which it is active is somewhat rare, the actual window is reasonable in length, and the very short tug time allows for more attempts on average, which offsets its tendency to escape. The designer has also noted that in areas largely depleted of ether, the usage of certain techniques may become more difficult, making the capture of the concept more challenging than it appears on paper. Since it's never been attempted before, I'm not sure how that would go, though I would love to see some testing in that regard in future iterations. For now, I can't evaluate that. That aside, mechanically, this is a relatively simple fish. There's nothing wrong with that, again, but the appeal of the concept is certainly rooted more in its other traits. In terms of engagement, the ecosystem that the concept is planned to go into is quite sparse, so it's difficult to judge. The chosen active period of early morning, just before dawn, however, strikes me as very scenic, and something that fishers will surely appreciate. The fish's reflective fin mimics the flash of the sun's first rays breaking across the sand, which is remarkably clever. It's always good to see a concept so strongly tied to its proposed parameters. The appearance, size, and weight of the sign is overall fairly intriguing and reinforces its mechanics in almost all respects. I'm pretty duly impressed. Overall, the sign of the seventh scale is an excellent concept. Ultimately, its success will depend on a more developed understanding of ether deserts. If the effects of ether deprivation are not as severe as predicted, some may find the concept a touch simplistic. As an aside, I do sympathize with concept designers. I myself occasionally feel constrained by the rules of the star, and I'm only a reviewer. Well, as our understanding of our world deepens, I'm sure there will be more and more exciting and interesting ideas that may someday become reality. This next concept is something of an uncommon archetype, a sea urchin, or perhaps lake urchin would be more accurate. This concept is, uniquely, a freshwater creature. While urchins are broadly a very successful archetype, with urchin concepts finding success in oceans across the star, they are a bit less popular than your more standard fish, perhaps due to their slow-moving nature and perceived simplistic structure. Urchin shell concepts often come in only one color, but I see this particular designer has decided to be a bit more ambitious. This concept is called the Dalamud Pincushion, submitted by Ines Gwendolyn. It is a very large freshwater urchin, averaging 13.5 ilms in diameter, with a red shell and bright blue spines, akin to an explosion frozen in time. It's a very exacting concept, I'll say, with certain specific conditions and traits. This pincushion only appears under specific weather conditions when the sky is heavy with a gloomy etheric haze. It is active only at night from the 20th bell to the 24th, or rather from 20 o'clock at night to 12 o'clock in the morning. The notes accompanying this particular submission emphasize the importance of the number 2012 for this concept. I don't understand the significance myself, but having a strong guiding idea is always a surefire way to produce a cohesive and thoughtful concept. Being a sea urchin, the pincushion must be caught with the fish technique of snagging, which involves attaching multiple hooks to the line to snag onto inanimate or less animate objects and creatures. To be honest, this is a technique that's rather fallen out of favor and has not been, well, important for a very long time. The last time it was with another freshwater urchin type concept. Maybe the submission is an homage to the old concept, or perhaps the same design. Sorry, no. Forgive me, a reviewer shouldn't speculate on the identities of the designers behind the concepts that cross their desk. The most interesting thing about this concept in terms of fishability is the following very peculiar trait. From the time the line is cast, it will always take exactly 11 seconds for the hooks to snag onto the pincushion. Ensuring this is certainly a feat of engineering. No variation in tug time is very uncommon, especially in this kind of fishing. It's a trait that's more associated with very voracious ocean fish, which are wont to bite a hook the moment it enters the water. It's definitely a novel concept to have such a static bite time that's relatively longer than 3 seconds or so. Aesthetically, the Dalamud pincushion is extremely striking. I always appreciate when a concept utilizes shape, color, and pattern to convey a specific visual identity. I dare say no other creature would look quite so explosion-y as a spiny urchin. The large size and bright coloration makes it very eye-catching, and the conditions under which it is sighted and caught give it a mysterious sort of air. This is a creature that would be easy to read as some sort of omen. In regards to fairness, let's see. Well, the proposed weather and time conditions aren't exceedingly punishing, with the windows of activity being reasonably long. It does depend on exactly how calm the pincushion becomes when it's active, which is not specified in the notes, but overall it seems very fair so far. Mechanics and engagement go hand in hand on this one. The fish is notable for its extremely specific bite timing. Of course, knowing your timings is an incredibly important fundamental skill when it comes to fishing, so this has great potential. The notes state that the tug produced by snagging a pincushion would be fairly ferocious due to its size, which has become something of an unspoken tradition with more quote-unquote special fish. But might I propose something slightly different? If the concept were modified to produce a less distinctive tug, it would be a much stronger test of an angler's ability to time themselves. Making it more difficult to distinguish from other fish in the environment would also force fishers to familiarize themselves with those other fish in order to pick out the very subtly different tug on their lines. A similar concept has only been done once before. I, for one, would love to see a concept that demands such rigorous attention to detail and encourages the refinement of such an important skill. All said, this is a very successful concept. I'll be interested to see where it goes from here. This one does depend strongly upon the fish around it, but it has the potential to be something very different, whilst following the same rules that we've always followed here in the Department of Fishing. Overall, excellent work! Next up is our first and only non-animal concept of this particular batch. Marine biologists may get a chuckle out of this one following so closely on the heels of a sea urchin. This is the supercalifragilistic expialidocious ichthys. The name nearly runs off the page. I do have to commend the designer on their very small handwriting. I will not be saying the name again. This is a variety of giant space kelp submitted by Elrich Montreux. This species of kelp can reach anywhere between 590 and 1350.01 ilms and possesses swirling galaxy-like blades. Oh, for those in the audience who are unfamiliar with kelp, this family of concepts are not technically considered plants, despite how they look, but rather they are algae. The structures that adorn their stems are not leaves, but technically referred to as blades. They do look like leaves, though. The concept itself is very straightforward. Being algae, it is completely unbothered by weather conditions or time of day. Rather, the concept is proposed to be simply exceedingly rare, with fishes having to make, on average, 1,000 attempts to snag a specimen. Yes, I did say snag. This is another inanimate concept that seeks to revitalize that old technique. Mechanically, it's very simple, but the notes accompanying this concept do explain that this is intentional. The concept was created due to a lack of extra large kelp, and the mechanics were kept simple but consistent to make it something which is always there for you in some regards. The practice of making ink prints of various aquatic life forms is fairly popular, but not often spoken about. Speaking from my experience here as a concept reviewer, it is exceedingly rare for designers to care about something like print variety, and I have to applaud this one for considering a factor that most others would overlook. While the concept is not demanding in terms of mechanical difficulty and fisher engagement, it was created for a specific purpose that it fulfills well. The aesthetics are, I have to say, top-notch, and there could hardly be a more fair set of conditions. I have honestly very little to critique about this one, though I will note that some of the higher-ups might take issue with the ichthys part of the name, applying a suffix designated for fish and fish-like animals to a species of space kelp might be crossing a line in terms of nomenclature regulations. Honestly, I support it though. This crowd can categorize practically anything as a fish. If the department insists on continuing to accept nearly every concept that comes our way, it's only fair to concede that kelp can be fish too. Right? That makes sense to me. Speaking of fish, in a rather more uncontroversial definition of fish, this next submission is a trio of sharks. Sharks are a perennially popular archetype. Their streamlined strength makes them remarkably charismatic creatures that dazzle and endear even those with little to no familiarity with marine biology. As we say here, if you want someone to start fishing, give them a shark. They are a very successful archetype, with sharks having found niches all across the star in just about every habitat that one could imagine, surviving better than many other concepts. The one challenge with sharks is that many shark concepts tend to be near the top of their respective food chains, making it difficult for new ones to pass approval at times. The higher up the chain one goes, the less biomass is available, basic biology. That's not my job to evaluate though, so I don't care about that. Here are the sharks: Alopius pelagicus, Alopius bigeye, and Alopius fox, a trio of pelagic, that is, saltwater thresher sharks with distinctive long caudal fins, and I must say, very adorable faces, inhabiting warmer, perhaps tropical waters. The fox is the largest and the most common of the three, it says, and serves as bait for the other two. Interesting. Larger fish are... Well, no, that's not true. It is a little bit uncommon for the larger fish to be the bait. Let's see. The basic setup is this. The bigeye is prone to nibbling on the fox, and the absence of bigeye is what may lure the legendary pelagicus to come out of hiding. Like the bigeye, it also likes to eat the fox shark. So, at first glance, this is a somewhat standard system of fish, but there are a number of eccentricities in these concepts. Firstly, while most would expect the so-called big, it's a little bit of a confusing term, I don't know who came up with it, big fish to have the higher escape rate, the opposite is true in this case. Common fox shark actually is the one that slips most often of the three, according to the notes. It's not unheard of for ordinary fish that serve as prey for a number of other creatures in their ecosystems to be escape artists. This was originally a design trope intended to preserve ecological stability in the face of the increasing popularity of recreational fishing, but it has become an unexpected, fun little twist for many, sometimes frustrating for many. The proposed escape rate of over 90%, however, is extremely high, by far the highest of any concept of its kind ever that I've ever seen or heard of. This concept is an aggressive biter, chomping on bait quickly and frequently, which offsets that unusually high escape rate. In contrast, the bigeye is conceptualized as a premier predator of the fox shark and can both be easily tempted to bite and is very likely to stay on the line when it bites. It is thoroughly unpicky about time of day and weather, as opposed to the final shark, which only comes out of hiding on particularly hot mornings following foggy or cloudy nights. It is a much rarer fish that overlaps completely in terms of tug time and strength of the bigeye, a rather dastardly design, I'd say. Mechanically, this is another concept that could go a few different ways. It has become something of a norm, especially in recent years, to design fish with fairly distinctive mannerisms that can be isolated cleanly through bite time, bite strength, or both. These sharks go against that norm with their complete overlap, but I don't believe they have to or necessarily should be completely identical in that regard. While bite timing is a basic skill that ought to be one of the first things a fisher considers when learning about a new fish, bite distribution is a concept that relatively few pay attention to. Simply put, timings are typically not evenly distributed across an entire range, but rather will fall more commonly around a particular timing, forming something of a bell curve. That is to say, Just because these sharks overlap completely in their ranges does not mean they have to bite in exactly the same way. For example, perhaps the big eye's curve leans towards the lower end of the range while the pelagicus leans higher. In such a case, while it's possible for any tug to be either, a fisher can make a decent guess as to which shark it is based on precisely where in the range the bite falls, and can use that guess to make their own choices about whether they want to try to reel it in or not. This fairly simple design element makes for an instantly very compelling concept. Personally, it's one of my favorite little tricks, and I would be very glad to see it employed with purpose more often. In regards to fairness, the unconventionally high escape rate on the first step in the chain is actually a bit of a mercy in contrast to some other fish concepts. By making the likelihood of failure the highest on that first step, one will typically fail early and therefore be able to make more attempts over the period that they are fishing. The time and weather constraints in the place here make for a rare but not exceedingly rare uptime, which is rather standard and broadly fair enough. Aesthetically, this is a trio of really distinctive looking sharks. I do make special note of the combination of weather patterns specified in the concept. Clouds or fog followed by heat waves strikes me as extremely hot and humid. It's the kind of atmosphere that one could practically swim in. I'm sure fishers will find it unique at minimum. Let's see. Oh. Deepest apologies. I forgot to say the name, quote unquote, name of the researcher here. This concept was submitted by Luke. And last but not least, a fairly unique little concept of a creature that wears accessories. Fashion design is not common around here, of course, but many choose to adorn their familiars with accessories or clothing. I suppose it's not too far of a leap to conceptualize a wild animal that happens to be wearing something as well. There are some questions about, how does it acquire it? How does it stay on? But this is early concept review, so we can set those aside for now. This is the 8-armed jack submitted by One Fruity Snacks. It's a fairly average-sized octopus with a whimsical little getup that is lured unerringly, rain or shine, by the presence of treasure maps. How charming. Honestly, perhaps I spoke too soon when I said that snagging was a technique on the decline. A full half of today's concepts have utilized it in some way. Those familiar with fishing will know that the technique is known to occasionally produce treasure maps from certain waters. Made by whom and for what reason? It's anyone's guess. The octopus itself, being perfectly capable of grabbing a fish's line itself, does not benefit from the technique at all, but it is attracted by the maps that are produced by it. Mechanically, this is another concept that is not complicated, but utilizes its unique trait well. The tug time is long and success is uncommon, but not rare, making for a broadly pretty fair design. The key element here is the map. One can only find one every so often, so while Jack itself doesn't have any sort of preference in terms of time of day or weather patterns, its association with these mysterious treasure maps still makes chances to capture it strictly limited. It's something of a choose-your-own-adventure, fitting for a swashbuckling octopus. Or rather, it's a choose-your-own window, which is a fairly unique take that balances the benefits with unfussy, always-up fish with the benefits of fish with more limited windows of activity. That is, it's accessible by anyone, no matter where they are on the star, but you can't just sit there and bash your head against it forever. The concept as it stands doesn't necessitate any special knowledge of the environment or ecosystem. Again, simplicity in some aspects is not bad, especially when a concept has a particular driving idea that other complications may distract from. Aesthetically, the concept is very cute and the mechanics seem unpunishing but very unique. I do have to shout out to the yellowish, orangish color. It does resemble gold, which is a very nice touch on the designer's part. If the designer wishes, they could adjust parameters to make the experience of fishing it a little bit more difficult. But that's once again personal preference and is broadly the kind of concept that I'm always happy to see cross my desk. It's very simple, it's distinctive, and it's effective in what it sets out to do. It's a very strong foundation and a creative solution to a design problem that's been plaguing this department for a while. Oh, well, it's almost time for my break, so I'll call it there for today. I hope I was able to offer some insights into what we here at the Department of Fishing look for in a good fish design. A round of applause for all of our designers, please, for being brave enough to submit their ideas for scrutiny. Not everyone can do that, and I sincerely appreciate it. And finally, if I was able to inspire anyone to think about fish and fishing more deeply, even if only a little bit, we here at the Department of Fishing would consider that a great success. I hope everyone has learned something today. May you be inspired to develop your own concepts. I would be honored if some of them made it to my desk one day. Take care, and thank you all for joining me for Concept Review.